Today I'm going to be talking about crafting the DevRel identity for your company. Woohoo! What does that mean? I am speaking from firsthand experience here, and I will get into that shortly. So, hi, I'm Ben. I am open source everywhere on the web. If you're looking for me somewhere, you can find me by looking that up, most likely. I have worked on a few projects. Most recently, I was working at Envision and have worked on open source projects like the OpenJS Foundation, Node.js, TC39, most recently Unicode, W3C, some standards, working groups and such. Howdy, howdy, howdy. And some of the sources from this talk, or for this talk, are derived from a lot of firsthand experience, primarily at Envision, trying to scale up a DevRel program there for a period of about 2 years. Some of the resources are from documented best practices, and then just countless conversations with wonderful people all across the spectrum, the developer spectrum. Some of the assumptions for this talk are that it is ground up. There's a lot of different contexts about size of company and business, and what types of teams that you're working with. Some of the things I'll talk about may be well known if you're in a DevRel program already that's scaled up, or you work at a large company. Some of these may be new, and I hope they are, and I hope it helps you. In the end, we're all in this together. So I hope this is either a rehash or helpful upfront. So let's imagine that you are the very first developer advocate at your company. You were hired to boot up the developer relations program. Well, what's your task? One of them is to create a world-class developer offering. Another one would be scale product gravity through the adoption of your APIs, most likely, across the developer spectrum. And build a community around it. That's my favorite. We put communities on things. Oh, and by doing all this, you will effectively bootstrap, maintain, and evolve your company's DevRel program. So how do you start making this task unambiguous? Because that's the classic thing about DevRel, right? Is that all the tasks are loosely defined and pretty ambiguous and sort of high-level terms that you're faced with. So let's frame this in terms of quality of inputs and outputs. That's how I'm going to proceed with the rest of the talk. So I'll talk about the quality of your inputs and the quality of your outputs and how that results in delivering strong opinions that build your program over time. So input number one, study your leadership's structure and communication dynamics. Your leadership is the gatekeeper. I mean, the people in your leadership are the gatekeepers of your role's success. They hold in their hand your ability to continue what you do and make DevRel awesome at your company. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of 3 different sizes of companies to sort of hit the spectrum here. Let's say you work at Joe's App Shack, your small business, and you build them, you sell them, you make apps for people, they reap the reward or the profits after you build them. So within this context, you might be just central, right in the middle of the conversation between everybody. And it's going to be really easy for you to go directly to your product lead if you need to voice concerns from the community and synthesize your metrics and your information into something that is directly actionable by the developers on your team or the designers on your team. And it's a pretty small shop, so you're able to really have a ground up persona within your company. Well, let's say you don't work at Joe's App Shack. Let's say you work at Slick. It's a mid-sized business, and they're really good at business communications. In this case, you're going to have multiple verticals that you're thinking about. And the verticals are represented by product organizations. So it may be, by organizations. So it may be product org, maybe marketing, maybe business development, or any of the above, sales. And you still have the autonomy to be able to craft your metrics well, and probably go set up a time to go directly with the leadership to be able to evolve your business and co-collaborate. Well, let's say you work at Microhard. It's a big enterprise business. If you don't subscribe to something they offer, you probably will soon. It's you're probably, like in a big business like this, you're not going to be starting from the ground up. There's already going to be a pretty matured organization that you're going to exist within. However, you might be tasked with booting up a very strategic aspect of that developer advocacy program to handle the growth of the community around a certain offering. Like, let's say at Microhard, you need to build up the community around their Teams platform or whatnot. Yeah, you're going to have to work really hard to gain the trust. You're going to have to serve first and then ask later. It's really important to not go in guns blazing, but think about it in terms of, how do I serve and how do I gain the trust of the people to trust me for the task that I was given. So that might be your case. And if that is your case, the rest of this may be more common knowledge to you, but hopefully you get something out of it. So next I'm going to talk about inputs. So part of the DevRel scope is the developer persona. So you have your own persona when you're building up the DevRel program that you can bring into the conversation that is not familiar necessarily across the other, that you're actually responsible it's not familiar across the different parallels of the organization that you work within. And you might be talking about how to evolve the mastery of your company, or your company's mastery within the domain of standards as a long-term plan, alongside the goals that are 2 years out for the current roadmap. But it's really important to recognize this up front as an input. The community is your input, and then you're able to synthesize the community's concerns to your company, as well as advocate for the concerns of your company within their community. So has your surface area been defined by your leadership? Probably not. They're hiring you to do this well. So it's up to you. And you should define this before someone else does it for you. What's your position within this is another important input, what's your position within the company's structure and power dynamic? Yeah, I kind of touched on this already a little bit, so I'm going to move along here for time. But I think what's most important is, what do they think of you, and how do you know? How do you know? How do you track what they think of you? Do they even know about you? Are you just a number on a page, or do you have a relationship that you're building with leadership and across organizations within your company? I think something that's really important to recognize up front, if you are trying to advocate for changes within your company that build a developer relations program over time, is that you're going to be working between the tension of two philosophies that are in residence at your company. And this is pretty true across most every company I've ever encountered. You're going to be continually validating the existence of your team in light of these two philosophies. And the first one is rising the tide. There's a lot of people that believe in shared value and pursuing the ends or the end goal around what is the shared value of what you're doing. Is it evolving your tools over time? Is it, is it making tools such that your company is the master of them, and other people rise up around you to be able to use them and profit from them as well? There's a lot of people that believe in this. The organizations who tend to care about this the most are typically DevRel, engineering teams, IC developers, and definitely if there's an open source programs office, they're going to care about thinking about things this way within the company. The second philosophy is beating out the competition with a monolithic product. And this is most important to people who are most solely focused on, not solely, but most focused on capital growth and scaling sustainability for the business. The organizations within the company that tend to care about this the most are the investors, the product leadership, the marketing, business development. And DevRel definitely lives in the eye of the storm between these. As far as in my experience of building a program over a couple of years at a fairly large company, I had to consistently rectify the alignment of the rising tide. How does this benefit everyone in the ecosystem? And product sustainability. How are we actually delivering outputs that matter? And that's why I keep coming back to the proving the business value of things like supporting standards that reinforce the short-term goals with long-term solid goals that put your company in a position of leadership. So let's move on to output frameworks and outputs in general. This was a great quote that Seth Juarez from Microsoft, he's a cloud advocate there, recently told me. He said, create content first as a developer advocate. Create content first. Help grow the community. And with that, refine the product. Continually creating content is a primary thing for any developer advocate or advocate program. If you're not creating content, you're not telling a narrative, you're not tying things together. It unifies the narrative publicly and privately. And then take advantage of the uniqueness of your role. Being a DevRel is like playing the instrument in a band that nobody really plays. And so they look to you to do it well. And you get to leverage that with the relationships that you build. Apply radical candor. I would say there's a one-to-one relationship with the application of transparency and radical candor with effectivity in the communication across your organization. And you're in a privileged position. You get to be agnostic about, developer opinions about, APIs and developer tooling and this sort of thing, and be able to communicate that across the company on behalf of both the development community and the company that you work for. It's like being a diplomat. Another good way to do this is to set up regular or periodic check-ins with your stakeholders. Co-collaborate as much as possible. You don't want to be in the dark. Continually checking to see if what you're doing is in tune with what they care about. Another output framework here is to solidify. This should be fairly obvious, but solidify your usefulness across the company. That's essentially what you're trying to do, and do things that people really care about. A good way to do this is to align your OKRs, which are objectives and key results. Essentially a roadmap contract, if you will. So if you can align your OKRs and your roadmap within your org and across company verticals, it's like being a community bridge across your company. And also being able to think about what the community cares about and framing that in the terms of your OKRs are really important too. Also take agency of culture, communication, collaboration, and education within your company, and co-own it as a program. A good output that is really beneficial for product is to identify and relieve product thresholds. So if you have thousands of users waiting for one feature from one company so that they can adopt your API. Recognizing that and communicating that and advocating for that is definitely going to solidify your position within the company and be very help you become more and more valuable. Advocating for community interests in developer marketing to retain an authentic narrative is a good output. Internally educating your technical organizations on developer persona best practices. Just taking agency of the fact that you are someone with knowledge across, in a domain that other people need to be able to do their job well. Educating sales on how to best communicate with developers about tools that they may want to use at which time in their development cycle. For example, is a good way to think about this. But being able to be that voice of the developer to the rest of the companies is a good way to make key outputs that help the company grow too. So principles for solid output. Have a regular content creation cadence. Contextualize your KPIs, your key progress indicators, to how your leadership tracks progress. So you don't want to just make your KPIs only relevant to your team or your org, but you want to think about it across how the company is tracking KPIs. Define what your DevRel team's qualified leads are up front. This is becoming a common term within the DevRel community. If you want to read more about it, check out DevRel Qualified Leads by Mary Thengvall. It's a really key way to think about producing value over time as DevRel. Use friction logging for your own output validation. You don't just have to use friction logging, which is another great tool in the developer grab bag. Usually used to validate things like the usefulness of blogs or documentation or things like that, to validate the points of friction, or to notate the points of friction and then alleviate them over and over and over. Do this for everything you do. It's a great way to think about your outputs in general. Prioritize regular feedback from peers and colleagues across teams and company organizations. And finally, I'm going to briefly touch on output measurements. So there are different output measurements that mean different things to different people across different size companies. If you want to see a more of an exhaustive list, there's a community-generated exhaustive list on the DevRel, on this Dev2 blog that Tessa and Mario published. There's a link to it down there. Please check that out. It's really great. Most of the time, I'll say it's the money that talks. So when you're looking at your KPIs and your outputs, you can think of things in terms of like how many subscriptions to the service that your company is offering were a direct result of the OKRs that you set, and how do you track every point of output all the way back from what you put out to how many subscriptions happened. Okay, and then regularly capture and synthesize first-hand product feedback and use comparison language to other companies. People love that. Define your DX benchmarks. How long did it take an average user to go from no exposure to our API to having something meaningful on their screen? What was the time frame? What's a meaningful time frame for us? Categorize your KPIs by stakeholder persona. So think about which KPI is meaningful to which person in the company. And if you want to look, I'm running out of time, so if you want to look at some of the other outputs I suggest, please check out my my slide deck. But I will say that groundswell support is vital. Instead of going for the jugular and advocating for something, gathering everyone around you and tracking how many people say that they might agree with you on a position to be able to then build your opinion. And the results are strong opinions. You've created them, you've fostered them, you've delivered them, you've created data, shared values, bridge building, and agency. You've fostered groundswell support, effective performance measurements, a consistent, inspiring narrative, and you've delivered great DX outputs that scale your company and community over time. Thank you.